If there's one thing I struggle to care about these days when it comes to the MCU, then it would have to be the TV shows. Like many people, I think, I was a long-time fan of the MCU as a whole. I remembered watching the first Iron Man movie and thinking that it felt so different to the other superhero films I'd seen being made over the years. I really enjoyed all the other origin films of the first phase, and then the first Avengers movie really kicked things into high gear and well and truly changed the game. The hype and excitement continued to build over the course of the decade as new stories and characters were introduced to the franchise. There were some TV shows, but they were pretty disconnected from the overall universe at the time and mostly just paid lip service. It's not like how it is these days where everything feels largely interconnected. Anyway, the franchise kept snowballing and building up huge amounts of hype, acclaim, and box office success, leading into the massive success story of the two-part Avengers finale, Infinity War and Endgame, which finished off the storylines that had been developed over the course of the decade and pushed things forward into a new era. Then came the rise of Disney Plus and the new era for the MCU, where it felt like there was an overabundance of content to watch and enjoy. Suddenly, it was becoming a chore to have to watch everything to try to keep up with what's going on with your favourite characters. It was fun at first, but as the hype and the quality started to dwindle, so too did my interest in having to keep up with everything, and I fell off the wagon. I'd still go and see the movies, but I didn't approach them with the same excitement I had in the past. It felt like that time was well and truly over and done with. This year has seen a rejuvenation in my interest in superhero franchises in general, though. First, we had Thunderbolts, which, whilst a commercial disappointment, did manage to earn a lot of audience goodwill, followed by Superman, which is DC, but was still good enough to keep my superhero hype flowing, and then the most recent film, which is the Fantastic Four First Steps, which I had a lot of fun with too. It kind of feels like a new era is on the horizon. It might not be as successful and popular as the franchise was by the end of the 2010s, but very few franchises are pulling out those numbers in this day and age anyway. However, despite my rejuvenated interest in superhero content, I'd be lying if I said that that really extends to the shows. I think the only one that really captured my interest was Daredevil Born Again, and that's only because it's Daredevil and is following off from the Netflix show, which was really good. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy to just watch the films, to tell you the truth. They're far less of a time sink, and so if they suck, I can just walk away and think, well, that was a bit of a shame. With a show especially, if it starts good and then fades away, you've invested a significant amount of time into it and makes it far more frustrating. This is especially true if you've been watching over the course of a couple of weeks. Thus, I had no real interest in the majority of the shows, and so when I saw that new one, Eyes of Wakanda, was coming out, I simply shrugged. I had no interest in it whatsoever. I didn't look into it, and I didn't know that it was going to be animated. I think if I had known the whole time, I would have been a bit more hyped up, because with animation comes the potential to take more risks and do things a bit differently, whilst a live action show is going to come with more budgetary constraints. Once I realised this, I decided, why the hell not? It actually seems to be a nice breath of fresh air, and was clearly not really connected with the wider MCU. So it felt like perhaps they were going to be able to do something completely new here. Something that's solely its own standalone narrative that depends on nothing else, and is simply there to tell its own story. It actually had me rather excited, to tell you the truth. I love a good animated show, and combining the MCU with some history sounds like a pretty good time. So I jumped into things, and I was rather surprised to discover that this is only going to be a miniseries. 4 episodes that were released all at once, which is something that's rather rare for Disney+. Usually they're going to go and drop 1 episode per week to keep you invested and keep your subscription running, but they probably assumed that Eyes of Wakanda, an animated MCU series with not much in the way of hype surrounding it, was probably not going to be the big difference changer when it comes to their numbers. Fair enough, I suppose. I feel like this is probably the case for the majority of the content they put up on Disney Plus if it has no real name value, and this just doesn't. It has Wakanda in the title, yes, but no major characters you'd associate with that side of the MCU. To be honest, the more I think about the concept, the more surprised I actually am. I didn't think that after their more lackluster outings in the last couple of years that they'd take a chance on a project like this, but here we are. I feel like it did pay off though, as it seems to have gotten a good audience reception at the very least. It currently has a 92% critical approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes off of 36 reviews, and a 70% audience score off of about 100 reviews. I'm honestly a little shocked that there are so few audience scores, to tell you the truth. I mean, the show's almost been out for a good 2 weeks, so you'd hope that there'd be a bit more engagement than this. Then again, I probably shouldn't be that surprised, given once again it's not exactly filled up with content that's driving people to engage with the MCU at large. There's no big name character to be had here, not even a Black Panther. Well, there is, but you know what I mean. It wasn't advertised, and it's not the Black Panther that you know. Thus, I don't expect that it got a massive viewership, and I wouldn't be expecting a second season, although based on how the first season ended, I probably wouldn't have expected there to be any more of it to begin with. Before we get stuck into the actual storyline and the individual episodes, I think we can talk more about some of the general things at first, specifically the animation. I actually really enjoyed the style they went with. I will admit that I wasn't all too sure about it at first, and I fell into that classic trap of becoming overly used to the more polished and expensive animation that you're going to see in actual cinematic films from Disney or Pixar or studios like that. Obviously, they're not going to be spending that much money on this show, but regardless, once I managed to shake that off, I found myself really enjoying it and found it to be very visually engaging. I just think that animation as a medium is one that is criminally underused in the MCU because I think it lets you get away with a lot more than you could in a live action context. Think about how brutal and violent some of the action sequences in the episodes could be. You wouldn't see them go that hard in a live action context, and I think it upped the stakes and drama a lot because of it. I honestly think that's something that was very clear across the episodes. The quality of the action was really high. It's important as in the end, that's a big part of what makes up superhero content. You need to have good fights that stick in your mind. This has that, especially in the third episode with that really cool chase scene with Iron Fist infiltrating the War Dogs facility. The narrative itself within the show, it was really well crafted. It's engaging, exciting, and I had a lot of thought put into it. I think the overall story, both in terms of the narrative that ties the show together with this concept of Wakandan isolation being a mistake and leading the country to eventual ruin in the distant future, as well as seeing the individual impacts of that isolation playing out with the various different minor characters too, was a very impactful arc to have. I just think that narratively, this is a really solid miniseries that's able to weave a compelling overarching tale into this anthology style that ties back into the MCU very well. It's engaging world building. It builds up across the episodes and then it gives you a very satisfying payoff with a moment that turned me into the Leo DiCaprio pointing at the TV meme by the end of things. It's not often the MCU's getting me to do that, so on that score at least, I think it was a job well done. I also really like that the show infuses some elements of real history and mythology into the different episodes, to the point that knowing these stories or that history simply enhances everything. The only major thing I think I disliked about the show itself was likely some of the voice acting. At times, the accents could get a bit much and felt really forced. There were some good ones, of course, but also some pretty bad ones in there too. From here, though, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the individual episodes. The first episode, titled Into the Lion's Den, sets the tone for the show perfectly and creates a lot of intrigue going forward into subsequent episodes. It's an action-heavy episode with a very long fight sequence on the ships. The story follows Noni, a former Dora Milaje who flunked out and is now looking for a second chance. She's being sent out to hunt for Nakati, a former agent who's gone rogue and who the government fears could intend to share Wakandan secrets with the wider world. This is all happening in 1260 BC, by the way. Anyway, I like that this episode was rather clever in how Wakanda's presented. Here, it seems like they are the complete heroes of the story. They have advanced technology that's given them strength and power, hence why they hide it. In this episode, they're proven right to do so, because Nakati's managed to forge a kingdom on board his great fleet, simply using his technology, and part of that kingdom involves abducting slaves that can be enlightened. Here is where Noni enters the picture, intentionally being abducted from Crete so she can be taken to the fleet. We see that he's managed to gather up followers from all across the globe, and now it's up to Noni to take him in or to take him down. It's harsh, but you don't see it as such because he's framed as being so unambiguously the bad guy. Whilst he talks a big game, in the end he's no better than what he claims Wakanda is. He's all about control. It's quite clever because it positions you to assume that the War Dogs and Wakanda itself are going to be framed as the unambiguous heroes of the story forever. Noni's awesome, she kicks ass and she gets a lot of awesome kills that builds up the hype. Surely she can't be wrong, right? The ending of the episode is so inspiring and hopeful, and so it lulls you in for that second episode. Legends and Lies follows Bukai, aka Memnon, 60 years later as he tries to infiltrate the city of Troy during the Trojan War. To do this, he's joined up with Achilles and takes up a false name. This episode, clearly, you knew something bad was going to happen. Achilles is calling him brother, and he gives him his mother's trinket. You know that Memnon doesn't really care about what they're fighting for, and instead he simply wants to get his hands on the vibranium and then go back to Wakanda. After all, he's been fighting there for years at this point. All the while, you're waiting for something to happen, and whilst you know that things are likely going to end badly between the friends, it's hard to predict how badly. That's why I like that the story was somewhat enhanced if you knew the legends or the histories. That Memnon and Achilles fight at Troy, and that the death of Memnon is meant to herald the beginning of the end for Achilles. He dies soon after. Thus, you kind of had to know that they were going to throw down in the end, and that Achilles is certainly going to die along the way. And of course, both of these things actually happen. Achilles is slain in battle with his friend after he abandoned him to die earlier in pursuit of the vibranium, and then Memnon dies by discarding his name and returning to his original identity to live in Wakanda before being sent out into the world somewhere new. I'll be honest, I was not expecting this to be that heartbreaking, but they built things up so well with their deep connection, which is then shattered in that final battle. When he returns to Wakanda, Bukai can't find peace because he knows he doesn't fit there anymore. He's too different, he's changed as a person. This is where the story starts to show that the isolation takes too much of a toll. That perhaps it isn't the right way. After all, if he'd been honest, Achilles would have probably helped him and let him leave with no questions asked afterwards. Instead, they pursue total secrecy and isolation, which makes it very difficult because they develop connections with those they meet in the outside world. They're only human after all. It's the same thing in the third episode, Lost and Found. This episode's highly action-based and follows Field Agent Basha in the year 1400, who returns from China with a dragon statue within which is some vibranium. Most of this episode is just a really exciting action sequence and a look at the version of Iron Fist, but I think when you come away from the episode, the reality is that this didn't need to happen at all. That's the point. If they were allowed to place trust in the people they meet out in the field, instead of maintaining total and complete secrecy, things could be completely different for them. After all, Jirani, the woman that Basha met in China who nursed him back to health and who he ended up having a short-lived romance with, was easily able to do so. She easily got the vibranium out of the statue, and she just wanted to keep the statue for her people because it's important to their culture. However, since he didn't trust her, he just steals it, and she comes all the way to Wakanda in secret on his plane, and there you have it, they fight. Also, the fact that the Wakandans have actual planes in 1400, and yet T'Challa still has a bodysuit he has to manually put on in the first movie is insane. You'd think that based on this, they should be much further along in their technological development by the time of the MCU, right? But regardless, the story continues to showcase that by hiding away from the world, they've simply made things more difficult for themselves. This, of course, all then concludes with Episode 4, The Last Panther, which deals with the last Queen of Wakanda coming back in time from 500 years in the future to stop Prince Tafari and his mentor Kuda from taking a vibranium axe back to Wakanda. This is the axe that Eric, aka Killmonger, will one day steal, which in turn gets T'Challa's attention and kicks off the plot of Black Panther. However, if it's safely in Wakanda, this can't happen, and T'Challa will never realize that the isolation of his country is a very bad thing. By not guiding other nations and not helping in times of crisis, they won't be able to stand against the threats which leads to an eventual alien apocalypse. Hence why the Queen comes back to alter the timeline, to ensure that the mainline MCU plot can take place and Wakanda can improve its foreign policy. I will say that the time travel is a bit confusing, and I have no idea how that concept's even meant to work in the MCU anymore, but that overarching story of trust, friendship and cooperation over isolation, fear and paranoia, it's really well executed, and it serves as a perfect complement to the original film. This is the type of stuff they should be making for Disney Plus shows. Nothing that means you miss out on key plots or characters for the actual movies, but stuff that helps to enhance the overall viewing experience and fleshes out the world and characters more. I hope there's going to be more where this is coming from because it was truly awesome. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Eyes of Wakanda? Did you like it? Hate it? Are you hopeful for more? Maybe not? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe and let me know.